So this is Paige Bueckers, right here. This is one of the better players in all of women's college basketball. Heck, you could argue one of the best. She's a really damn good player, not one of the all-time greats like some people are saying, but she is one of maybe the 10 best UConn players. Sheryl Swoopes is under fire after a commentator quoted her false claims to elevate Paige Bueckers over Caitlin Clark. Fans are furious, calling out blatant misinformation that unfairly downplays Clark's dominance. The debate over who's better has been going on for years, but now outright lies are fueling the conversation. She doesn't force anything. She's not going to go out there and take 40 shots. She isn't that kind of player, and I know we've talked about the Caitlin Clarks, of the day. Now, Caitlin Clark and the WNBA, they're different kinds of players, and there's just nearly no comparing them because Paige Bueckers' social media is exploding, demanding answers. Was this a misstep, a media agenda, or intentional discrediting? The truth behind these false narratives is finally being exposed. Stay locked in because we're breaking down the facts with the deception and why fans are refusing to stay silent. This again, you can't compare Caitlin and Paige because Caitlin's Paige is an all-around player. Caitlin's not. Paige is a better defender. Paige is a better pull-up mid-range shooter. That is the only two things on the floor that Paige Bueckers is better than Caitlin Clark. Literally, she does nothing else better. The Caitlin Clark versus Paige Bueckers debate has been going on for years, but let's be real. There is no real debate anymore. Clark has established herself as one of the greatest college basketball players ever, while Bueckers, though extremely talented, has not reached the same level of dominance due to injuries and different playing circumstances. Yet media figures continue to push misleading narratives that attempt to elevate Bueckers at Clark's expense, and this time things went too far. During a recent broadcast, a commentator parroted some questionable claims, saying Paige Bueckers is a more complete player because she gets her teammates more involved, doesn't force shots, and isn't selfish with the ball. But the real jaw-dropper, the claim that Caitlin Clark takes 40-plus shots per game and plays an inefficient, selfish style. Caitlin's a better rebounder. Caitlin anticipates passing lines better. Is she a better defender? No, but she anticipates passing lines better. Caitlin reads the game better. Caitlin has more gravity. Caitlin is better working out of double teams. Caitlin is 100 times better passer. Caitlin's faster, especially going downhill. Caitlin reads defenses better. If you know anything about Clark's actual stats, you know how ridiculous this is, but here's the kicker. These same misleading statements have been made before, almost word for word, by none other than Sheryl Swoopes. That's right, this isn't the first time Swoopes has tried to undermine Caitlin Clark's greatness, and now that a commentator is repeating those same claims, fans aren't letting it slide. The numbers don't lie, and it's time to set the first. Let's break down the most absurd claim, that Caitlin Clark is a volume shooter who takes 40-plus shots per game. This is not just an exaggeration, it's a flat-out lie. Clark has played nearly 190 college games, and in all that time she has shot over 30 times in a game. Just 6 times, not 40, not 50, 6 times over 30. She has never once attempted 40 shots in a game, ever. So, where is this narrative coming from? Is it deliberate misinformation, or are people simply not doing their research? Either way, it's incredibly misleading, and it completely discredits the impact Clark has had on the game. And let's talk about efficiency. The one season where Clark took over 20 shots per game, she averaged 32 points while maintaining elite shooting percentages. That's not inefficiency, that's historical dominance. Meanwhile, Paige Bueckers, who has never been asked to carry an offense the way Clark is, plays in a structured system under Gino Arima, where her shot selection is different. That doesn't make her better or more efficient. It simply means their roles are different. This isn't a knock on Bueckers at all. She's a phenomenal player, but the idea that she's somehow more complete because she doesn't shoot as much completely ignores context. Clark's responsibility at Iowa is different from Bueckers' role at UConn. Comparing them without acknowledging the differences in their offensive systems is just dishonest, but the false narratives don't stop there. Another claim that was parroted on air is that Bueckers gets her teammates more involved than Clark. This one is particularly laughable when you actually look at the numbers. Clark is third all-time in NCAA Division I history in assists. Let that sink in. Third all-time. She isn't just an elite scorer, she's also one of the best playmakers the game has ever seen. The idea that Bueckers is somehow the superior facilitator is not supported by any statistical evidence. If Clark were a selfish player, she wouldn't be leading the country in assists while also dropping 30-plus points per game. The reality is she creates so much attention from defenders that she consistently finds open teammates for easy shots. That's what makes her so special. She isn't just dominant on her own, she elevates the players around her. So, why does this false narrative keep getting pushed? A big part of it comes down to how the media shapes perception. There's a long history of trying to fit female athletes into certain molds, and Clark's high-usage, high-scoring style challenges some outdated expectations. She's a player who demands the ball takes over games and isn't afraid to let it fly from 30 feet out. Some people love that, others, especially traditionalists, struggle with it, and this is where Sheryl Swoopes' involvement becomes even more interesting. Swoopes, a WNBA legend, has had a relationship with modern women's basketball discussions. On multiple occasions, she has made questionable statements about Clark's game, often downplaying her impact, efficiency, and overall greatness. At times it almost feels personal. Some fans speculate that Swoopes sees Clark as a threat to the old guard, a new superstar who is bringing more attention to women's basketball than ever before. Instead of embracing Clark's success, there's been resistance in this latest situation. Only adds to that narrative, but here's where things get even more ironic. Not 30 seconds after praising Bueckers for being the opposite of Clark, the same commentator turned around and admitted that Geno Auriemma himself wants Bueckers to be more aggressive, more like Caitlin Clark. That's right, Bueckers is being hyped up for being different from Clark. But at the same time, her own coach wants her to play more like Clark because that's what wins games. So which is it? If Clark's play style is so inefficient and flawed, why is one of the greatest college basketball coaches of all time telling his star player to emulate it? This contradiction completely exposes the flawed logic behind these comparisons. The reality is Clark isn't just a great player. She's a generational talent who is rewriting the record books in real time. And no amount of false narratives, misleading comparisons, or forced debates will change that. Meanwhile, Bueckers still has a lot to prove. Again, this is not a knock on her talent. She is an incredibly skilled player who will likely have a great career, but she has not reached the same level of dominance as Clark, and it's unfair to both players to keep forcing this comparison when the gap between them has become so clear. At the end of the day, these false narratives only hurt the sport. If you like the gas video, then like the video and subscribe to the channel. Instead of celebrating both players for what they bring to the game, the media continues to push divisive, misleading comparisons that aren't backed by facts, and that's why fans are so frustrated. They see the numbers. They watch the games, they know who the best player in college basketball is, and they're tired of hearing blatant misinformation being pushed to try to change that reality. Caitlin Clark is not just the best player in women's college basketball. She's on her way to being one of the greatest ever, and no amount of media spin, selective stats, or exaggerated claims will ever change that. The truth is out. The lies are exposed, and the debate, well, it's not even close anymore. Sheryl Swoopes' comments and the commentators' remarks have sparked a much bigger conversation than just the Caitlin Clark versus Paige Bueckers debate. Fans are no longer just pushing back against one false claim, they're exposing a pattern of misleading narratives in women's basketball coverage. The frustration isn't just about Clark being disrespected. It's about how certain players are elevated unfairly while others are constantly scrutinized. Caitlin Clark has spent years proving herself at every level. She's breaking records, drawing massive audiences, and elevating the game. Yet whenever a discussion arises about her greatness, some people seem determined to find ways to diminish her impact. The idea that Clark takes too many shots doesn't make her teammates better or isn't efficient has been repeated so often that some casual fans might believe it's true even though the stats prove otherwise. What makes this situation even more frustrating is the clear contradiction in the way these narratives are pushed. The same people who praise Paige Bueckers for playing differently than Clark are the ones saying she needs to be more aggressive, take more shots, and dominate the way Clark does. If Clark's play style is so flawed and inefficient, why is one of the greatest college coaches of all time encouraging his star player to mimic it? This isn't just about Clark and Bueckers anymore. It's about how media narratives are shaping the perception of women's basketball players. The way male athletes are discussed is entirely different. If an NBA player were breaking records, drawing massive viewership, and carrying his team, the media would be celebrating him as the face of the sport. There wouldn't be constant attempts to diminish his impact by propping up another player who hasn't achieved as much. That's why so many fans are pushing back. They see the double standards in the way Clark is covered compared to some of her peers. They see how certain legends of the game refuse to embrace what she's doing, instead trying to downplay her accomplishments in favor of others, and they see how the media is manipulating narratives to make the Clark versus Bueckers debate seem like something it isn't. Paige Bueckers is an incredible player in her own right. She has been through injuries, fought her way back, and remains one of the most talented players in college basketball, but using her as a tool to discredit Caitlin Clark does nothing but hurt both players. Bueckers deserves to be recognized for what she has actually done, not for being falsely positioned as Clark's equal in order to fit a forced rivalry. The reality is the gap between Clark and the rest of women's college basketball is massive. That's not a knock on anyone else, it's just the truth. Clark isn't just the best player in the game today, she's on a trajectory to become one of the greatest players of all time. Instead of celebrating that, some in the media seem more interested in nitpicking her game and finding ways to bring her down. Sheryl Swoopes' repeated criticisms of Clark have been met with growing backlash, and now that her misleading claims are being repeated on air by commentators, fans are making it clear that they aren't going to let these false narratives continue unchallenged. The numbers don't lie. The performances speak for themselves, and the idea that Clark is anything but a generational talent changing the game in real time is getting harder and harder to sell. But here's where things could get even more interesting. Clark's transition to the WNBA will force a major reckoning in how these narratives are handled. Right now, certain media figures still have the luxury of comparing her to college players, twisting numbers, and selectively framing discussions to fit a false narrative. Once she enters the pros and starts proving herself at the next level, these arguments will collapse. If Clark dominates in the WNBA the way she has in college, the media will have no choice but to acknowledge her greatness. The false comparisons will no longer hold weight, and the commentators who have spent years downplaying her impact will be forced to backtrack. At the same time, Bueckers will also enter the league with unrealistic expectations placed on her by the same media that has built her up as Clark's equal. If she struggles to immediately make an impact, or if Clark quickly establishes herself as one of the WNBA's top players, those who spent years forcing this debate will have to answer for their misleading narratives. Fans have made it clear that they won't tolerate media spin anymore. The social media era has changed everything. Narratives can't be controlled the way they once were because fans have access to real stats, real footage, and real discussions. They can see through biased reporting and call out misinformation in real time. So what happens next? Nike, ESPN, and other brands that market women's basketball will have to decide who they truly want to invest in. If Clark continues to dominate, will they finally embrace her as the face of the game, or will they keep trying to push alternative narratives? Will former players like Swoopes finally give Clark the respect she has earned, or will they continue to cling to outdated biases that don't hold up anymore? And most importantly, will the media finally let Caitlin Clark and Paige Bueckers be great in their own ways without constantly trying to force a rivalry that no longer exists? Clark is rewriting the record books. She is changing the way people watch women's basketball, and she is doing it all while proving doubters wrong at every step. No amount of false comparisons or misleading claims will change that. The truth is out. The debate, it's already over. So what do you think? Did Sheryl Swoopes and this commentator push a false narrative, or was this just another example of bad analysis? The facts are clear. Caitlin Clark is on another level, and these comparisons are getting ridiculous. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Should the media stop forcing this debate, or is there still a case to be made? And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to check out our next video because we have even more wild takes to expose. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much. Subscribe now.